I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jamestown Public School Board to order. It is 5 p.m., May 15th, and we're in the Thompson Community Room of the middle school. Please note we did have the 4 p.m. new board member orientation in the district office conference room. I'd like to welcome all those in our audience today and thank you for coming. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Melissa, would you please read the school board norms?
The board-developed norms are to share and respect opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached. Execute all duties of the school board in compliance with North Dakota Century Code, properly prepare for meetings, and to commit to assessing board effectiveness and ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Melissa. And those are our new board norms. I'm getting used to the new ones. Nothing under public communication. Are there any changes to previously declared conflicts? If there are, this would be the time to state that. Gail.
I declare conflict of interest for the resignation of Leah Nelson, and I undeclare my conflict of interest once that's approved for executive sessions for negotiations.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Aaron.
No change to my conflict.
No change? Okay, thank you. Any other conflicts of interest? Any other conflicts of interest or changes? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda. At any time, a board member can remove something from the consent agenda. It does not need a second. Is there anything you'd like removed from the consent agenda? Anything you like removed? Is there anything you'd like removed from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Aaron, second by Gail. We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving on to our regular meeting. Do we have recognitions? So nothing under recognition. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss that. We have people here. Correspondence, we have no court cards today. Under reports, Mr. Will Nelson, would you please come forward and restate your name and give us your student council report, which is probably your last report?
Yeah, I'm actually not giving the report. I'm Will Nelson. I'm the current executive president of the Jamestown High School Student Council, and I'm here to introduce the co-presidents of the Jamestown High School Student Council effective our meeting on Wednesday. So we'll hand over the gavel. I'm going to have to cut it in half and hand it out. But they will give you the report, and this is the last you'll hear from me. So thank you.
Thank you, Will, for all your reports. Thank you. And welcome, and please state your name, and we look forward to your report.
I'm Gabby Tweeton, and I will be a senior next year.
I'm Hattie McDonald. I'll be a junior next year.
Last week was Teacher Appreciation Week, and Student Council held a breakfast for all the teachers, and along with that, we made cards saying thank you to appreciate all the teachers.
This Friday, we will have College Merch Day, so those graduating will wear a shirt representing what college they're going to, and the current president and vice president of Student Council will be the speakers at graduation.
Any questions? Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next fall.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have SRO report. Please come forward.
Good evening. How is everyone? Good. I was told the main kind of topic tonight is DARE, the DARE program. I'm not certified to teach DARE. It's a 40-hour class, I believe. With how busy I was this year, it wasn't something I was able to get to. So there was no DARE classes taught this year. But aside from that, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think I taught between 5 and 10 classes from like bicycle safety, arson awareness, classes of that sort. Those were taught throughout the year. and a few of them were with firefighter Sheldon Moore with the Jamestown Fire Department. Aside from that, I can't remember my last count of sporting events I went to. I think I'm in the, I gotta be in the 20s, maybe 30s of sporting events, between starting with soccer and football all the way through. I just went to the girls softball game a couple days ago. I'm not quite sure what my numbers are on that. I just pulled up my calls for service for the year. The numbers aren't going to be necessarily accurate because I only took a call for service number if I was taking some sort of paperwork or enforcement action, and I was at 225 calls for service for the year. But if a student was having a tough day and just need to be talked with or talked to, I wouldn't take a number for those, because I felt that was just more of well, PR isn't the way to put it, but personal help instead of like, enforcement or education on top of it. So, yeah, and then the one hard lockdown, and then the one shelter in place, and that's pretty much been my year. Without getting into any of the criminal investigations that I've done, because some of them are still active. So, was there any questions from the council?
Any questions from the, oh, Diane, hi. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. You can't imagine how much we appreciate having an SRO, because there was a time that we didn't have one for a couple of years. But
Sure.
I had two questions. One is, can you give us any theme that is coming through on the calls you're receiving? And the second one is, as far as DARE goes, from what I have heard and read, that it's a bit of a controversial program in that it's yesterday's news and there's probably something better that could be put into place. How do you personally feel about DARE?
I cannot give a personal opinion on DARE because I haven't researched it fully. To be honest, I haven't had time. It's been a pretty busy school year. I've heard both sides of it, in all honesty, just in passing. I've heard that it's still a relevant program, and I've heard that it's, there's other programs out there. But I haven't done the personal research on it to be able to give you an accurate answer on it. And as far as the calls for service this year, it's been anything from a tobacco violation to a crash in the parking lot to some pretty in-depth investigations involving, I would say, felonies. That's about as far as I can get into that one. But kind of anywhere in between. It's kind of just like working the road, but instead of a road, I have a cafeteria. So.
Any other questions from the board or comments? Diane, go ahead.
I do have a question that I think the public would be interested in. You know, it's probably true in every small community that there are those that say, oh, you just cannot believe what's going on at the high school. Would you say that in general, our high school is fairly healthy, or are we in a bit of hot water?
Well, so you gotta, it's society, the high school isn't any different than any of our community out here, right? It's just a little bit more condensed. I personally love our high school. I have a blast going to school every day. Just like when you're, the city of Jamestown, sometimes somebody makes a mistake and, some enforcement has to take place. But I haven't been an SRO in any other schools, but I would say it's probably on par for any other school. We got a great bunch of kids. And they're a lot of fun, and just seeing them from, K through 12, it's quite the experience getting to work with them every day. And honestly, after teaching these classes, I don't know how teachers do it, Because at the end of a week, teaching one class to 5 different class, I'm spent. I can't. Yeah, I've really learned even more appreciation for the stamina of our teachers doing this day in and day out. So the short answer would be I don't see any.
And just to follow up, I would say I agree with you. We have a great bunch of kids in this district. And, you know, everyone focuses on the negative. It's human nature. But my experience has been it is a great place to raise kids and put them into the school system here.
Well, that's why I brought my kids back.
There you go.
Dr. Leck.
I just have a follow-up question. Scott, would you say when you were hired, we had conversations about the potential for additional, an additional school resource officer based on what we have seen in the separation of time between different levels. Would you still say that that is accurate? That as you've been in this position for a year now, that you would you still feel the same, that additional time would be beneficial?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think, well, me personally, from the conversations we've had and how safety-oriented I am, I love to see an SRO in each school. Yeah. I know that's not at all a possibility, but yeah, I think, and just as a police department having more time to provide the service, you know, that we do, I think it'd be very beneficial.
And maybe for the benefit of the board and maybe even the community that's listening or watching, and I know that not any day is typical for you, but can you talk us through what a typical day may look like for you?
Sure. Well, a typical day as far as the way I would like it to go, absolutely. So I try to be up at the high school by 7:30, have my cup of coffee made by 7:45, and then out the door at 7:50. Now that the weather's turned, I like to go down to the elementary schools. I'll pick one for the day, and I'll go just greet the kids when they're getting off the bus. Stand outside, drink my coffee. That's trying to become my trademark with the kids. They always ask where my coffee cup is. From there, I usually try to make a few laps around the high school, just the hallways, checking doors, saying hi to classes. I'm still in a debate with Mr. Kosel at the high school over. I disagreed with something that physics says happens, and I said I don't believe physics on this one. So we're still working our way through that. But, you know, I like to step into classrooms, and then I try to get down to the middle school here at least once a day, get through all the hallways, you know, step into some classrooms, say hi to the kids. And then I'll move over and check my emails and just kind of see what the day's going to bring me. Being present is very, very important to me. I think at the beginning of the year, the parents they would call and say, "Why is the cop car outside of the elementary school?" I said, "Oh, because I'm saying hi." But at this point, it's just kind of normal, I think, for parents to see me out there. You know, and I said, whatever happens throughout the day, you know, as much time as I can spend in the schools, walking around and not in my office, I think it's a great day. So, and then during when school lets out, I try to go drive around, do school patrol, make sure nothing too crazy is happening during pickup. But,
Any other comments? Jason?
So is continuing with DARE or researching a new curriculum, if you will, on the agenda?
Right now, with our staffing levels, I'd have to talk with the chief to answer that for you. But we are, as a police department, we're trying to be in a transition period right now with staffing and stuff, and maybe things will change once we get a few new officers up to speed. But to give an accurate answer, I'd have to talk to the chief for you on that one.
Dr. Luck.
Jason, I can follow up with that too. I think an important aspect of the SRO is always going to be, Scott talked about visibility, but prevention is always going to be a big piece of that. And whether it's DARE, another program, or some other area, prevention is still going to be important. It's just that we have to get to an appropriate staffing level, and we have to have training in place and all of those things and have the right curriculum. But prevention is always going to be something that's a pretty key piece for us.
Any other questions or comments from the board? I'd like to thank you for the work you've done. I also, and maybe some of you saw that in the paper, but got to be part of giving you a customer service award.
Yes, ma'am.
The Chamber of Commerce, you were nominated for a Chamber of Commerce Customer Service Award for a month, and was part of that. And that was just for building relationships with kids. And I do see you out and about and at events, and that's all about building those relationships. So I appreciate that work that
Thank
you're
you.
doing. So
And I'll tell you, I got the best job in the department, so you'll never hear me complain. I got nothing to complain about, so.
any other? Do you have anything else, Dr. No? Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you
Okay,
very much
thank
for coming
you.
today. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Our next item on the agenda is our board education competency policy review. Meredith Bukovic. And Dr. Luck, you have part of this in your superintendent's report. Maybe I'll just have you lead off with that.
Sure, you have the presentation and a handout provided, and if you want to pull that up, that might be an easier thing to follow, although you could certainly look at the presentation as well. This board education was based on board direction. Meredith works with Pearson Durick, and we were asked to provide board education on policy review, the varied roles of board members and administrators in the investigatory process, execution of policies, and then in a policy review. Are those policies or protocol change or any changes to policy or protocols appropriate? And so Meredith will go over some policies in more depth than others, and we have had that conversation that policy AAC and KACB, AAC is the non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy, KACB, complaints about personnel, to focus more highly on those. And so with that, I think I'll turn it over, Meredith.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. As Rob said, I'm out of Pierce Derrick Law Firm in Bismarck. My colleagues and I represent, over the last few years, approximately 80 public K-12 educational related entities. So a big part of my job is speaking to individuals like you on topics such as this. And I want to preface this by explaining that, if there's been any questions about how things have been handled this year, in particular with regard to an incident that happened in January. You all are not alone maybe in some confusion or questions or concerns you might have about policy implementation. So many board members across the state have very similar questions, so don't feel bad about that. So while our office does have an attorney-client relationship with you, today we're talking generally. We're not talking about any specific matter, so I just want to caution with that. So today I'm going to go over these 3 items. As I just referenced, there was an unfortunate incident that occurred during a basketball game earlier this year. There may have been questions from the public, maybe even questions some of you had about whether or to what extent school boards are going to be getting involved with situations like that. So we are going to talk today a lot about policies that apply with that situation and some others, what those policies say about board involvement. And then I'd like to go over quickly when school board members get involved with employment-related matters. It sort of relates to the other topic. And then we're going to end with a brief explanation about public participation at board meetings. So I'll first touch on a board policy that explains the board's role, and then I'm going to go through some of those specific policies that Rob mentioned and a few others. it's really important for all of you as board members to be really aware of what policies and regulations your district has adopted. And it's especially important to know because you might have people from the public coming to you individually with concerns. You might run into people at the grocery store and other public places. They might have comments or questions for you. If you have in the back of your mind some of these policies, you're going to be able to perhaps get out of a question that you feel uncomfortable having to answer, but also just an ability to direct people to the right policy and procedure where they will then feel, appropriately heard. So this is the list that we will be going over. Let's start with the school board pledge of ethics. This is coded BA. All these policies too originate from North Dakota School Boards Association, so I want to give them credit where credit is due. And then the language has been adopted by the Jamestown School Board over the years. So in this school board pledge of ethics policy, there's a list of items that you have all pledged to follow, and I wanted to touch on just a couple since they are most relevant to the presentation. The first one, you have pledged to be aware that the strength of the board is as a board and not as individuals. Individual board members have no authority or power to act on behalf of the board. Therefore, a board member should never make out-of-meeting commitments. So this one, if anybody does come up to you individually, it's a really easy one to reference to let them know. If there's a complaint, I can point you to the right complaint policy. Otherwise, if it's just a general comment or a concern, I can perhaps refer you to administration. Then the second one that is on that board pledge of ethics policy, that list of things you've pledged, is that you will be cognizant that the primary function of the board is to establish the policies by which the schools are to be administered, but that the administration of the educational program and the conduct of school business shall be left to the superintendent. So that is a big one, right? That's one that the public often has a really hard time understanding. The public often thinks that school board members are the last stop and everything will go to the school board if they're not satisfied maybe with how something's been handled beneath the school board, and it's just simply not the case. And we're going to get into that with some of the additional policy language that we will get into. All right, you have a general patron complaint policy. I have all the codes on the slides for you. This is a very general policy. It isn't specific to any type of complaint, and for this reason, we don't often see reference to it, but I want you to be aware of it. We might not need to reference it because we're going to instead be referencing a different more specific policy that is more applicable to a given situation. But be aware of this one and what it states. So a few of the key provisions from this policy. Again, individual board members have no authority to resolve complaints, and complaints should be resolved at the lowest level of authority possible. Whenever a complaint is made to an individual board member or the board as a whole, it will be referred to school administration for processing at the lowest level of authority possible. If all other remedies have been exhausted, a complainant may request that the matter be placed on the agenda of the next regular school board meeting. However, the board will not hear, consider, or act upon complaints that have not been investigated at each appropriate level of authority, nor will the board hear, consider, or act upon complaints for which specific complaint resolution procedures have been established that do not allow for board review of the complaint, including but not limited to complaints about personnel and complaints about instructional material, which are two policies that we're going to get to. So as to that last one, that last provision on the slide here, that's going to be relevant to the investigations that unfolded after that January basketball incident. Since those incidents were investigated using specific resolution procedures that are addressed in other policies, that was the reason they did not ultimately come to the board for discussion. One other provision that I didn't include on this slide, but that is in this policy, good for everybody to know, is that parents of students are treated the same as patrons, so parents will follow the same channels for processing complaints as any other citizen would. Okay, this is a big one. Schools across the state are using this one very frequently. your complaints about personnel policy. This policy is one that should be referenced anytime somebody might come to any of you about an individual school employee, a concern that they might have. And that person complaining can be anybody. It can be a parent, a non-parent patron, another staff member, any of you. So let's go over some of the important provisions from this policy. Complaints should be resolved at the lowest possible level of authority. If either party is not satisfied with the handling of the complaint, the matter can be appealed to the superintendent for final resolution. So final resolution means final resolution. So typically it's going to be a direct supervisor that will handle a complaint about an employee. And then there is this possible appeal to Dr. Leck. Board members shall refer individual complaints about district personnel to the superintendent or the designee. Complaints about the superintendent and business manager shall be directed to the board president. And this one's very important. You maybe all have a good understanding that the board as a whole supervises the superintendent, and in most districts, the business manager as well. Is that true here? Some boards have given supervisory authority to the superintendent, but here the board maintains that supervisory authority over the business manager. So, oh, you do, sorry. Okay, Dr. Leck has that authority. So scratch that. That third one's a little bit different for you all, but if there is a complaint about Dr. Leck, that complaint shall be directed to your board president and your board president only. And this is another one that's a little bit, difficult for everybody to understand. There's a reason for it. The board president will be tasked with investigating a complaint about Dr. Leck, and I realize no complaint will come against you, Rob, but it is only if the board president has a finding per that investigation that requires action by the board that the board president would then bring that finding to the board with a recommendation for action. That action potentially being disciplinary action of some sort. If there isn't the need to come to the board for action, it likely won't be discussed beyond a report that the investigation took place, it was completed, and there is a finding, a letter of findings, in the file. So at some point, a school board member may need to review such a letter of findings because you do supervise the superintendent, and that might be relevant to your evaluation. But aside from that, even a complaint about the superintendent is not going to be coming to the board for discussion. A lot of this I maybe can preface by also saying it stems from legal protection for you all so that you don't have a claim for defamation by an employee. If you're talking about something related to personnel, there's no executive session option under North Dakota open meetings law, so you're going to be talking about it in the open, and you don't want to be having somebody alleging that you have slandered their reputation. This policy, and Rob mentioned it earlier, but this policy was a big one that was used after that January incident. There was a complaint. Part of the complaint was that staff members were not, essentially that they maybe weren't doing their jobs or not doing their jobs very well at that basketball game. So that was a personnel complaint, investigated. It doesn't go to the board for the reasons that I just explained. Okay, another really important policy you all have, non-discrimination and anti-harassment.
Meredith, before you continue on KACB, can we go back to that just for a second?
Yep.
I know that one of the, and I don't mean to speak for the board, but I know one of the questions the board had related to the policies that were enacted were, do you see or recommend any changes to policies or protocols based on anything that we found in terms of this policy?
Yes, and I do not. The way that your policy is worded, and it's the same way NDSBA still words the policy, I believe, is how it should be. At my direction, Rob did not bring the determination letters to you after that investigation. Again, if there would have been the need for the board to have taken some action against that individual, then it would have come to you. And I have a slide as to that in the kind of the back end of my presentation, but I'll just mention it now. This is completely hypothetical, but say Dr. Leck had determined that, and I'm just going to throw out a position, the principal at the game, did something or did not do something that they should have done, and that it was serious enough that Dr. Leck felt as though that individual needed to be recommended for a discharge for cause. Because that individual is a certified employee with continuing contract rights under North Dakota law, Dr. Leck wouldn't have authority to terminate that individual himself. He would have to bring that recommendation to you all. So there would be a recommendation to contemplate somebody's discharge for cause. If you also moved, there would then be the right to a hearing for that individual before their contract could end, their employment with the district end. And so when there isn't the need to bring such a recommendation to the school board, there isn't a need to bring the information to the school board. And again, that's to protect people from having sort of dirty laundry aired, I suppose you could say, and to protect the district from a potential defamation action. Does that all make sense? So I like this policy the way you have it, and I would not recommend any changes. Okay. Non-discrimination anti-harassment policy. All school districts are required to have this policy. You have a version that I would only recommend a few very minor changes to, and it's nothing substantive. My changes really relate to some new Title IX regulations, so not applicable to tonight. This policy protects your staff and students from discrimination based on a protected status. So what's really important with this one is that the alleged conduct needs to have some relation to the alleged victim's protected statuses, which are listed in that first bullet point, but things such as race, religion, sex, gender identity. This is the policy that's going to apply. So even if the complaint is against an employee, I just went over the complaints about personnel policy, even if it is against an employee, if it relates to the protected status of the alleged victim, the district has a responsibility to instead use this policy and investigate the allegation, using a grievance procedure that comes with this policy. Okay, so district employees are required to report any discrimination or harassment to the appropriate grievance coordinator when they knew or should have known something in violation of this policy was occurring. Grievance coordinators are almost always administrators. They should never be board members. If the appropriate grievance coordinator assigned to conduct or oversee the investigation is the accused, the superintendent or the board president, if the superintendent is the accused, shall designate a different individual. So there again, only the board president might have some involvement. So as it concerns that January incident, this policy was certainly considered. It's very technical. In my legal opinion, this policy didn't necessarily apply to the conduct because this policy protects Jamestown students and Jamestown staff. More technically, the Bismarck Public Schools non-discrimination anti-harassment policy applied to the conduct. That doesn't mean we didn't consider this policy. We still obviously do not want students or anybody engaging in discriminatory conduct. So it was, very relevant that students receive some education training on this policy. But by the technical language in the policy, it's questionable that it applied. And I want to mention too that my office, the way this policy is worded stems from a multi-year back and forth between my office and the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Another school district had a complaint filed with the Office for Civil Rights, completely unrelated to this, but this was many years ago. At the time, Office for Civil Rights determined that district had not technically complied with one of the anti-discrimination laws. They required that the district overhaul its policy and procedure And my office worked with OCR to get a policy and procedure written in a particular way that OCR says complies with the various laws. So the way your policy is worded is, stems from that. We then gave that version to North Dakota School Boards Association. So because of that, I still feel as though the policy language is what it should be. And here again, a school board as a whole is very rarely going to hear about anything stemming from one of these investigations. Does anybody have any questions on that one before I move on? And then just real quick, again, this is something that is not going to have board involvement, but I want you to be aware you have a violent and threatening behavior policy. Administration is going to take care of any potential threats. If any of you board members would ever come to hear about a threat or a possible threat, we would want you to immediately report that to Dr. Leck or a principal. And then by law, as you probably know, you are required to have a bullying policy. You do have one. Your bullying policy has North Dakota Century Code definition of bullying in it. So one thing with this policy, the first bullet point there says that it addresses allegations that a student or staff member has bullied another student or staff member. I don't love that language. It's how you all received the policy. My one slight maybe change to it would be that staff conduct against other staff likely don't fit well under the policy based on how bullying is defined in Century Code. It's largely defined as conduct against a student. So technicality, and I could talk with Dr. Leck about that. But if you have staff complaining about other staff's conduct, I think it better fits under the complaints about personnel policy. Here again, this policy has language in it about a board president potentially being involved if there is an allegation against the superintendent. Okay. And then review and complaints of instructional and resource material, just a good one to be aware that you have. I don't know if you all have had to utilize this one anytime recently. Of course, across the nation, we're seeing more schools getting complaints about instructional material, so it's good to know that you have this. There's a grievance procedure you've already adopted for responding to criticism about materials used in schools. You also have some exhibits on your district website that go with this policy. And then I think this is the last policy that I'm going to go over, and just real quickly, teacher grievances, you have a specific policy on this. Sometimes language is included in the teacher's negotiated contract. You have it in policy. These are going to be very specific to a teacher's complaint that, for example, something within the negotiated agreement isn't being complied with. So this is very specific to that. If it's a teacher that has a complaint about something else, this policy won't apply. But just be aware that this one exists. There is a procedure for dealing with these types of complaints. That procedure is summarized on the slide here, and there is a review process available to them by the board. So there's a chance that there would be board involvement with a teacher grievance under this policy. Okay, so quickly, let's go over the topic of when a school board gets involved with employment-related matters. And there's a lot of confusion across the state about this. It comes up a lot. We often see, for example, there's a complaint by the public about, see it a lot with coaches. You know, people are mad about a coach and that person needs to be gone type of thing. And people think that they should talk about that at a board meeting. That's just one example, but now that you're, maybe more familiar with some of your complaint policies, you already know what I'm going to say about this, but let's get into it. So under North Dakota Century Code, and I apologize, I have missed my .1, it's NDCC 15.1-09. A school board has the power to contract with, employ, and compensate school district personnel. The board evaluates and supervises the superintendent, sometimes the business manager, but it is the case that all their staff are going to be supervised and evaluated by somebody else. So ultimately, if somebody comes to any of you with a complaint about a staff member, no matter what that complaint might be, you are best to refer to one of the policies that we just went over and/or refer them to Dr. Leck or another administrator for lower level handling of the situation. At-will employees, so your teachers, your superintendent, your principals, these are the individuals I mentioned earlier that have continuing contract rights. They're what we usually call certified employees. They are not at will because of that right to a continuing contract. But everybody else technically should be treated as an at-will employee. You have your policy DBAA that addresses superintendent having the authority to hire those non-licensed staff members. That specific policy says there is no action of the board necessary so long as the board previously established the position and hiring is within budget limitations. And then that policy specifically also says these positions are at will. These individuals do not receive contracts. So I think that's something to always be keeping in mind. One policy you do not have adopted that you may consider adopting is, it's called a DED. It's an administrative leave and suspension policy. So NDSBA's version of that policy explains that when a certified or non-certified individual can be placed on administrative leave, paid or not, or suspended. Usually this is pending the outcome of a district level investigation or sometimes a criminal investigation. So that policy, a version you can adopt of it would give the superintendent authority to do that, to place people on suspension or paid admin leave. Without a policy, I think Jamestown generally has given the superintendent that authority, and that's fine too. The policy might just clarify that for the public and everybody involved. And then the last bullet point there, superintendent is authorized to discharge at-will employees and just needs to notify the board. You do have that policy. So that language is already specifically in a policy. So he comes to you to notify you that that has occurred. At those meetings, there generally should be no discussion as to the underlying reason for the reasons we've already gone over. Then we have the licensed contracted staff here that I've already mentioned. So the only way to end the employment relationship with those individuals is should they resign, retire, pass away, and then by way of non-renewing their contract or discharging them for cause, which are those very in-depth procedural routes that have a lot of legal requirements attached. And the superintendent will be bringing a recommendation for a non-renewal or a discharge. The board isn't taking it upon themselves to take that sort of action. And then I have a slide here that very generally goes over the difference between non-renewals and discharges. And this is where I was going to explain earlier. The reason you didn't receive a report from Dr. Leck about the outcome of that underlying investigation with the basketball situation and the complaints about personnel that came from that was because there was not a recommendation to non-renew or discharge. Without that recommendation, there was no need for Dr. Leck to bring the findings, the details of the findings to you all for discussion. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yeah, go ahead.
Back to the at-will employees and consider DED. The concept of admin leave, is that embedded in another one of our policies, or we just kind of, do you understand?
Go ahead.
I did take a quick peek throughout your list of policies, and I don't see that it would be in any of the others. This is kind of a standalone policy that touches on the topic. But I am aware of school boards that have, by motion, at prior meetings and even maybe years ago meetings, have given their superintendents the authority. So the fact that you don't have policy on it doesn't concern me in any great detail. I would just want you to know, and for Dr. Leck to have clarity that he has the ability to do that. And it is the procedure that I propose. I would rather a superintendent be making the decision to place somebody on, for example, paid admin leave, instead of taking that to you all as a recommendation to place somebody on paid admin leave. And again, that's because I don't want you all hearing about some underlying concerning conduct of a certified employee if at the end of a situation, you might be that unbiased jury who's sitting at a non-renewal or a discharge hearing on that same individual.
And yeah, good point, Jason. Part of the reason we're doing the review is just seeing, and I think we'll take a look at some of these policy recommendations, of course. Diane?
I was thinking about in our community, when we say, this didn't come before the board, the incident, because there was no recommendation for termination, many in our community would then say, well, what did happen? Mm-hmm. And I would like your opinion or suggestion on how we would answer that.
Sure. I think the best thing for the board members to do would be to refer any community questions to Dr. Leck or administration more generally, and then Dr. Leck could, figure out an appropriate way to answer a question such as that. Whether it's that investigation or others, under North Dakota law, investigations, certain information can become public record. So there's times when information is divulged that way. It's just that you're not discussing it at a board meeting because there's nothing necessarily that can be done. And so, I was thinking on my drive here, what might you do? In a situation like that, you as a board might feel really helpless and, wish you had a little bit more involvement or ability to do something. I think it would be a really good time, to maybe reaffirm, for example, your non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy. Even if there aren't necessarily changes to the policy, you could maybe have a board agenda item that brings up the policy again and a discussion about the importance of the policy and that you all strive for Jamestown Public Schools to be an atmosphere free from discrimination and harassment and things like that. I think that is completely appropriate without going into the specific incident underlying the discussion.
Dr. Leck?
I'd just like to add to that, and there's different strategies we could use. Meredith talked about one, providing board education, which is something we have done in the past when there has been issues or a need to reaffirm a policy or discuss something. Board education has been the way that we've done that. In this instance, if you remember, we had a number of communications, some of which were reports, some of which were community communications. In a typical situation, those wouldn't probably occur, but just because, and this was a conversation Meredith and I had a lot of times, was regarding, at some point it raises to the level where you simply have to provide more information than you might in another, because there are so many questions in concern or misrepresentations or misunderstandings, things that we had to be able to address. And so in the most serious of circumstance, you might see something like what we did, a few different communications out to the public or reports to the board in terms of general comment, but not the specific, not the specifics of what we're referencing, of a findings report, where if that was a different scenario, if there was a different outcome, that would have, and that's what Meredith is talking about, would have come before the board in a much more detailed process, because there would have been a board action associated with it. But we did feel like there was a need in the community and at the board level to provide some level of communication, so there was assurance that actions were occurring. And we did talk about process, and we did talk a little bit about the situations, but these are just become very complicated when situations are out in the public before we've had a chance to investigate. And as I've shared to the board before, sometimes, and it's unfortunate that this is the case, but sometimes the absence of a report assumes that nothing has happened. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. We were talking days and hours and weeks of work associated with doing this in a manner that followed policy, in a manner that was comprehensive. But in absence of that final report or when there's community conversation around those things, unfortunately, sometimes it appears that less is being done. So that's why we felt the need to bring a little bit more information than we might in a typical circumstance.
I would just encourage us as a board to remember that this opened up a conversation about school culture and the need to change it. And if the community has the idea that we are no longer talking about any of this, it all just went away, and we are just moving on with the status quo, that's not what we wanted to impart. So it is a tricky thing here. And I would encourage us to, those in charge that put together the summit, leadership summit, to continue to stress those things that we are doing that are obviously a result of wanting to change school culture without getting into the details of policy and who violated what and what happened to them in disciplinary action. I think we can still have very positive conversations about what we gleaned from this and what we are doing about it. But it certainly shouldn't be that we are not talking about anything anymore, because it gives the appearance that nothing ever changed and that nothing ever was done about anything, and that's not a good thing for a community to think.
Thank you, Diane. Anyone else have anything? Okay. Dr. Luck?
Meredith, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but I think from a board, if I can speak for the board, from a board standpoint, the board are representatives of the community, and I think we can't talk about specifics, and we've talked about policy, and you don't recommend policy, any necessarily policy changes, but as you review the process that we used to investigate, to come to findings, can you talk about your level of comfort that you have with the process that was used, any potential changes we should be considering, things that, in hindsight, boy, we should have done this in this way instead of this way. Anything that you can provide in a general sense that would help the board understand if this was handled in a process that is supported in policy and in good practice?
So, and I was going to mention this at the end, but generally speaking, I was very impressed by how it was responded to, and in particular how Dr. Leck handled his role in the situation. He was the one that had the idea that there should be some level of community statements provided, kind of at the outset and then at the conclusion as well. And we spoke about it. I read through his proposed, comments, and very impressed, generally speaking. So, understanding that the board likely wanted to have more information or maybe was getting some pressure from the community to provide some level of a response, I do very much empathize with that. You are in such a hard position when it comes to that kind of a scenario. I don't have changes. I have, I think I mentioned it to Dr. Leck, I have some very slight suggestions maybe for how the underlying investigation into the students, the interviews of the students, were conducted. Not that anything was done wrong by any means, but, just maybe some general tips for next time. But aside from that, I don't. I think it was thorough. It was necessary that it be thorough, which is why some time took. Another part of it was Dr. Leck was often waiting on information from parties to the complaint itself, so he was not able to finalize it more quickly, mostly due to that. So even the length of the process wasn't concerning to me because of the need to be thorough and accurate, provide everybody a fair chance to provide their version of the events and their side of the story. So for that reason, and I didn't mention on any of my slides, but these complaint policies, they generally provide a 60-day window for an investigation period. Similarly, there's a 60-day reference in state law when it comes to a public entity's investigation into its personnel. And then another thing I haven't really touched on, but disciplinary action given against a student that too is never going to come to the board. You know, a general statement like Dr. Leck put out that some students were found to have engaged in conduct worthy of discipline, that is perfectly fine to share. But a specific student's disciplinary action is never going to come to the board, with only one caveat, and that's under your suspension and expulsion policy. Dr. Leck is the hearing officer for any expulsions that might occur. Because the superintendent is the hearing officer, the policy provides an appeal right to the school board. I don't know if you've ever had to sit in on any of those, I hope not. But that's the one instance when the school board would hear about a specific student's disciplinary action. So I really don't have any comments as far as how that could have been handled better.
Jason, go ahead. Thank you, Meredith.
I excuse me, I agree. Everybody wanted it resolved the next day, and that's just not going to happen. My main concern was the amount of Dr. Leck's time it took away from the district. And that's not really a discussion for here. And yes, it went a lot of days, a lot of hours. And we don't need to discuss this here, but I would like to research or know ways we can maybe, if that happens again and there's 4 things going on in the district, how can we circumvent just the time suck that he should be doing other things to forward our district? I don't know if you have a legal opinion now, or if our new hire, hopefully by the fall of the year. Just that going through that whole time, that was just my only concern, was just time away from student achievement things, and I'll leave it at that.
I think that's fair. And, you know, generally, the policies are going to dictate that an employee, the employee who's the accused individual, that their direct supervisor, or at least somebody in a supervisory capacity, is the person that's going to investigate those. An option that is in these policies is that a third party could be designated. So, for example, you could pay an attorney at a law firm, or some, I think there's some former superintendents that have maybe kind of gotten together and have sort of a business where they do investigations. That is an option. You would always, to me, it would depend on what policy is implicated. So, for example, if the alleged conduct falls under your non-discrimination anti-harassment policy and it's a violation of Title IX, which is the law that prohibits discrimination and harassment based on sex, you, in my opinion, would need to be hiring a third party who has been very well trained on Title IX, because there's a lot of procedural requirements that go into those investigations. I wouldn't want you to just willy-nilly decide so-and-so should do this to save us time. And then the other, of course, issue with that is you're paying, and they can sometimes become incredibly costly. Yeah. But I understand your concern.
Thank you. Any other? Aaron?
Yeah, just to clarify, from my perspective and interest in this while it was occurring, wasn't so much that I wanted to get involved with the details of the investigation and see whose kid is it and what are we doing about it and what teacher is involved in it. I had zero desire to get into any of that. But what was interesting was watching this play out in the court of social media. And that whole investigation that was occurring in parallel with your investigation, and the national news media, and just the general visibility that was being spotlighted on the Jamestown Public School District nationwide. And that needed to be, in my opinion, was in your response and communication to it, I thought satisfied my concerns 100%. And it was basically, we need to have some level of board education for, what do we do? And simply stating that, we have to follow policy AAC, and that doesn't cut it. So, and what you did put together, kind of describing the process and what that was, I thought it was spot on, and that's really what addressed my concern. So, I don't know what, I guess I'm not concerned about these policies per se within here, and having that investigation done and then pausing and reflecting and not looking so much at the reactionary policies, but more, so do we have the right preventative policies in place? How did we allow for an environment like this to perpetuate itself? And those are the ones that have more interest to me, not the, here's how you do a complaint after it occurred. In policy, what should do we have any gaps for those preventative ones? And that's kind of where I'd like to, continue the conversation, much to, Diane's point with Leadership Council and whatnot. That's not a policy item, but is there a policy item that we could adopt to help that? So that was just from my perspective.
I pulled up the non-discrimination policy again, that middle bullet point, and again, this policy is multi-page, these are just a few of the most relevant provisions, but because district employees are required to report any discrimination or harassment if they have any knowledge of it, along with that is a requirement that all district staff be trained on the non-discrimination anti-harassment policy, what it means, what does discrimination mean, what are the protected statuses, what does it mean for them to have knowledge that something may be happening. So there is a requirement for that training, and Dr. Luck, you'll have to remind me, I've created an all-staff training for many schools across the state for them to just email out or however to all staff, so staff get trained on that because that's required by policy, and I don't remember if I did Jamestown. Okay. But separate from that, what I would really want to see more schools doing is training all students. Before something's happening, this is a policy you might not know students is in place. A blurb about it I'm sure is in a student handbook, but are kids really diving into the specifics of a student handbook? I don't, probably not. But also for them, you can read this language that's in this policy and it's pretty technical. And what does all of this really mean? What am I as a student protected from or prohibited from doing? I think that type of a training, however, Lyceum or however it can be done would be a crucial one. I think there's so much focus on bullying appropriately. But this one is different than the bullying policy, and especially now with all of the things that are going on socially with LGBTQ and all that, it's just a very, very relevant topic.
Thank you. I think it's good to just make sure we have the foundation, and it sounds like possibly a few little tweaks, but what we have in place is solid policy, and so that's good to hear. And I also am on board with Aaron and Diane, just continuing to see how to move forward and in a positive manner with some of the initiatives that Mr. Gaylor has started and is continuing to work on is great. So thank you.
If I can just make one comment, I think the policies still serve an important piece. They are reactionary, but sometimes they're related to judgment. And we have to be able to go back and say, you know what, that judgment didn't follow this policy. We have to have an accountability, we have to have an ability to react to what did occur. And I agree with you completely. Let's be proactive in what can we do to build capacity so something like this is far less likely to happen again. But I think the policies exist. They are reactive in nature, but they have to be, and they are judgment focused. So we want to make sure that there is something that we can be very clear with what our expectations are, but if those aren't met, then we have something to fall back on too.
I just had a couple last slides here and kind of bring it all back around to, whether something like that would be discussed at a public board meeting. We've talked in depth about the outcome of the investigation itself not necessarily being discussed by the board or by Dr. Leck to the board. But what about patrons who realize something's going on and they want to address the board? You have a public participation at board meetings policy that dictates the fact that the public can speak to you all and the procedure from doing so. So I want to just remind maybe everybody of the language that you see on this slide here, that the public will be prevented from commenting on topics that fall under, for example, the complaints about personnel policy. And a big part of this is prevented from commenting. It's not just they're allowed to comment and you won't respond. It's an actual prevention from even allowing the discussion by the public to take place. So again, very iffy. We want to be transparent to our public. We want the public to have the opportunity to share their feelings with the district, and that's why you have this policy in place. But it's also important, you know, to some extent to protect your staff. They've been adjudicated under policy already in a situation like this, and there's just not anything further that's going to be done. So I guess what you all have already been talking about, though, what can you be doing and what can you be sharing with your public to let them all know that you take these situations incredibly seriously? You know, let's just find a different avenue for doing that. That is all I had.
Thank you, Meredith. Anyone else have? Dan, did you read? Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Dr. Leck, for making this possible, because I think you explained very well, you know, why we have these separations, why we, at the board, can't know a lot of the details. I do have a question, because, you know, the official in conducting the investigations really funnels in onto the superintendent. And I know in this case, Dr. Leck, you brought in a lot of voices so we know it was a very well thought out. There was more than just one person making this decision. But if you just look at the policy, according to the public, you could theoretically do whatever you wanted. So how do we handle that from a, you know, assessing your effectiveness and oversight? Is that something that we would have to, you know, make requests saying, look, we would like to have you make a report on this with non-privileged information? Is that part of our, it's not necessarily part of the policy, but that would be incumbent upon us to ask for that information in order to assess his effectiveness at handling these?
Yeah, I don't know how best to answer that question. You know, essentially when you hire a superintendent, you are entrusting that they are going to implement the policies that you all have adopted, that they're going to do that well, or if they are not the ones to do it, that they're going to designate somebody who's going to do it well. So, you know, I guess generally speaking, your ability to address something like that would come with the evaluation period. If for some reason, you determined, however that might come to be, that Dr. Leck does a real poor job with an investigation like this, and, you know, there was some reason to issue some sort of disciplinary action or want to place them on an improvement plan or something like that. I mean, that would be board action, right? And typically that would come by way of the board president having investigated a concern such as that. So say you as a board member had a concern that Dr. Leck didn't do a decent, thorough job of that January incident. It would be the procedure that you would take your concern to your board president. She would look into it, and she would determine if there's anything to substantiate that concern. And if there is, which in this case I don't think there would be, but maybe in another situation there would be, then she could come back with a recommendation to the rest of the board that, you know, I found XYZ was awry here, and as a result I'm going to recommend to you all that we issue Dr. Leck a letter of reprimand, or whatever the seriousness might be. That would be a possibility. I don't know how you would otherwise learn that he was ineffective in that area, which is a struggle for you. You know, generally speaking, I'm sure when it comes to evaluating a superintendent, you're not there day to day to see everything that's going on. But that would be your appropriate route. If there's a concern, bring it to the board president.
Any other questions from the board? Comments? All right. Well, do you have any other comments? No? Yes, we really appreciate you
for having
coming.
me.
Yep, and walking us through this and taking a review of our policies. And I'll have Dr. Leck be in touch with you for those a couple little recommendations of minor things, and maybe take a look at that other policy for just so we have it in true policy, not in some old board minutes somewhere that we'd have
Okay.
to dig out. And so,
That sounds
so
good.
that might be helpful for the board to look at and review. So appreciate your time tonight and traveling here. So thank
Yeah.
you very, very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Moving on in our agenda, we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Luck.
Thank you. You have my written report. We have some hires coming up. I've given that biographical information. I wanted to touch briefly on House Bill 1205. There were two bills that related to libraries and prohibited or prohibitions in public libraries. It is important to note that that Governor Burgum vetoed one of those two bills, and one of those he signed. The one he signed was 1205. What I think is important to know about 1205, and I've given you the century code to be able to look through that as well, that does not relate to school libraries. The definition of public library in the sense of that's represented in 1205 is not a school library. And you can define, you can look at that definition yourself too. But I do believe that it's wise, and I've had conversations with library media as already, that I think we need to be proactive with review and a selection procedure for library materials. And we're going through, there isn't the same level of urgency that would follow a deadline that's established in law. But I do still believe that it's important that we have those proactive conversations about selection and about what does a review process look like, and making sure that we are consistent with the values of what our community standards are. If you look through House Bill 1205, and I don't know how much you've ever looked into this, but the House Bill 1205 really follows the Miller test. And you can look up the Miller test, but what it says is that material, if it's appropriate or not, follows the community standard. What does the community say about that text or that topic or that area? And if there's consistency between what's expected in the general public in your community, then that's acceptable material. And that's really what 1205 says. And as the conversation has been held, we believe that we should be looking at what those materials are and what is our selection process. I think if we fail to do that, a 1205, a different bill will come in the future that says, well, this is what you shall do then. I think as a school district, we have a responsibility to look through those. And I don't think from a library media specialist standpoint, you would get argument from that. We all have different standards, and I think we all have to be careful about legislating or making our own beliefs into policy or law. But I think those are choices that happen at the parent level. But I think we would have a missed opportunity if we didn't have these conversations about review and selection. We certainly don't want to be on the wrong end of a bill moving forward because we chose not to do that in public education. So we'll have those conversations there. I just wanted to pass that along with 1205, that it doesn't follow the standards of school library, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be having appropriate conversations. I've included a job description for the well, I'll pause. Are there questions on this one first before I move on? Okay. I have a job description for the continuous improvement director. I did have a board memo in the past, but I wanted to put that into a job description, so that'll be up for your approval later. Mr. Armitage will be here to present the technology plan, and he'll be available for questions. In the past, we talked about the title programs and how there was discussion about changing the allocation procedure. That would have been harmful to the district, but other districts as well. And so we did oppose that with the department, and they agreed with us, at least for now, that this isn't an allocation strategy that they're going to use, or allocation procedure that they're going to use for next year, although that could come up. But I think that's a big win for us. It would have been harmful to us, but much worse for others. And I outlined, we're talking small Class A schools, smaller Class B schools that have a high number of open enrolled students from larger districts, but really it's the tribal schools that were impacted so negatively from that shift that it would be hard to support something like that that had such a detrimental effect. And so I'm glad to see that we were able to get that eliminated for now, but I think it's still something on the horizon that we need to keep watching for. But based on that, we did get our preliminary title allocations, and I've included the two, the preliminary and the final. We see a small decrease in Title I, which we expected because our census count was down. But I was happy to see that we saw an increase in Title II. Title II is mostly for our professional development. In Title IV, that's safe and healthy schools, a few different other areas. I love Title IV is my favorite of the federal programs. And anytime we see increase in Title IV, I think that's a really good thing. Overall, we saw a net increase in funds for Title I for next year. Substitute teacher pay rate, later on in the agenda, you'll also be acting on a recommendation. I'm hoping, my recommendation will be, and I'm hoping that you approve a $150 increase. That is a substantial increase to where we're at, but I think it's a direction you have to go. We simply can't compete when we are so far below the average range. I think our substitute teachers do an amazing job. They're great educators, and we want them to keep coming back to Jamestown. So I think that's an important commitment. We had that $92,000 in requests. That was mostly Mr. Hageland and Mrs. Grounds who worked on that allocation, that request, I should say, for additional comprehensive literacy state development grant funds. So it's about $92,000 that were brought back into the district from the state, or that we're applying for, I should say. And most of that is instructional materials at the elementary level, but then professional development devoted to literacy and writing. You've heard about Steve Dunn before. That's to make sure that we have the funds available to continue Steve Dunn writing at the secondary levels. I think it's the last thing I have. Yes, the last thing I have is special education tuition deduction. If you look at the snips I took of our foundation aid payment worksheets at the bottom of this document, you'll notice in line 35, there's a pretty significant difference, meaning that the adjustment that is coming out is much less. In the past, it was about $150,000. Our projection for next year is $17,000. That means less is coming out of the state aid, and that is a result of special ed contract change. And so now that will no longer be deducted at 75%. So that, it's about $100,000 difference that you'll see that was money that in the funding that in the past was deducted from us. Now it won't be deducted, so that'll stay to be our money. So long story short, net increase of about $100,000 to revenue based on this change, which I think is a positive thing. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Jason.
The decrease of $5,000 to Title I, that's not going to impact our, just so we're clear, it's not going to impact the services we can provide.
Not at all. We're anticipating the same being able to provide the same services. The impact we'll see is in Title II and Title IV, a greater portion of our SRO will be able to be funded through Title IV, and in Title II, mostly professional development, will be able to cover all of our professional development costs, some staffing costs that can come out of Title II, but all good stuff.
Any other questions or comments about the superintendent report? And, okay, if not, moving on. Nothing under old business. Under new business, nothing under activities, nothing under buildings and grounds, nothing under curriculum, assessment, and instruction. Under finance, A, approval to set substitute teacher pay at $150 per day. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail. Second by Jamie. We have a motion and a second for approval to set substitute teacher pay at $150 per day. Any discussion? Jason.
Excuse me, do we track or have any idea on an annual basis how much is going to sub pay? I'm not necessarily saying now, but I think that'd be an interesting number for us to see.
It was $15,000 to $16,000 a year,
K-12.
right? That was the amount?
Thank
Yep.
And yes, Christie tracks that. So, Dan?
So that fiscal impact, that's the net above what we currently pay, so that will be the differential from.
difference.
Yep, okay.
the increase, not the total cost.
So that calculates out to be about like 9 substitute teachers per day across the district, roughly. So
I was wondering if we know, like, for this school year per se, or by semester, how much we're spending to hire subs. And not critical, I just think that'd be interesting to see.
Sorry, I heard your question is the fiscal impact. So my apologies. Yeah, we track the total allocation or total amount. That's something we could gather.
So we have a motion, a second. Okay, yep, we'll bring that to the next meeting, or Dr. Luck will have it in the superintendent's report. Any other, but yep, Chrissy does track that for us. Any other discussion? So we have a motion and a second for approval to set substitute teacher pay at $150 per day, and remind us where it was and where it's coming, what it was set at. It was 130?
It was 120, and the recommendation is now for 150.
Okay. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? I'd like to thank some of the administrators also brought this forward to saying, you know, we want to be competitive in this market. So that's my discussion on that. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, assuming roll call vote, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Under B and C, you have the general fund balance and the monthly financials for your information. 5, under personnel, A, ratification of master agreement for administrators. Is there a motion? Motion by Jason. Is there a second? Second by Steve. We have a motion and a second for ratification of master agreement for administrators. Any discussion? Any discussion? Dan?
Okay, we did approve a raise based off of an investigation of where the administrators stood across multiple schools and of similar size and similar activities and job description. The investigation was really very thorough, and they came in with a very reasonable number for the raise. And then we also put in the reference to the policy DDAF for sick leave bank policy. So that just is by reference in the master agreement now. So our next step will be to ratify that revised DDAF sick leave bank policy to include the discussions that have occurred in the last year.
Thank you, Dan. Jason, any comments?
Yeah, just, I feel good about the agreement. The 4% from the state is obviously making a difference on all of our negotiations, so that's nice to see. But normally I'm one who would say, can we vote on the agreements all at the same meeting? But considering the world we're in and the job market we're in, we want to get these approved as rapidly as we can.
Thank you, and thank you, Dan and Jason, for your work on this. We have a motion and a second for ratification of master agreement for administrators. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? We can do a roll call vote. Yes, we certainly can. Christy, are you ready?
Okay.
Go ahead, Christy.
Jamie Bear. And Diane Hansen. Heidi Larson.
Yes.
Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Gail Nelson. Dan Tweeten.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts. Jason Veldkamp. Or Steve Veldkamp, I'm sorry. And Melissa Gleason.
Unanimously approved. Moving on for B, approval of a job description for the continuous improvement director. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there, second by Dan. We have a motion, a second for approval of the job description for the continuous improvement director. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. C, approval to hire for the 2023 to 2024 school year upon a successful background check, appropriate licensure, and with salary to be adjusted upon completion of negotiations. We have number 1, Jalen Hillstead, JMS Math, salary $45,207.77. Caden Maring, elementary teacher, salary $45,207.77. Allison Best, elementary teacher, salary $45,207.77. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan, second by Jamie. We have a motion and a second to approve the hires 1 through 3. Any discussion? Any discussion? Jason?
General question. I've noticed on some of these new hires, we're just listing elementary teacher. Is there, we used to say 4th grade at Lincoln or whatever. Just some thought on that?
Yeah, I keep that, that's still in the biography that I put in the board report. I'm just trying to make the agenda concise, but that information is still there. Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Is there any continued discussion? Any discussion? Dr. Leck?
I would just make one other comment with that too. It's, we hire people into those positions, even if we place them in 4th grade. I think it's better to approve a contract for the elementary teacher, right, rather than approving a contract in a certain position. So I just want to make that designation of one of the other reasons why we made this shift.
Good point. Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second for approval to hire for the 2023 to 2024 school year upon a successful background check, appropriate licensure, and with a salary to be adjusted upon completion of negotiations. Number 1, Jalen Hillstead, JMS Math, salary $45,207.77. 2, Caden Maring, elementary teacher, salary $45,207.77. 3, Allison Best, elementary teacher, salary $45,207.77. Any other discussion? There being no further discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. D, there's a conflict noted on one of these, so I'll separate that one out to be voted on later. D, approval of resignations at the conclusion of the 2022 to 2023 contract year. Number 1, Jacoby Lloyd, JMS Reading. 2, Hannah Lloyd, Family and Consumer Science. Number 3, Heather Ani, elementary music teacher and director of choir and 6th grade music teacher. And number 4, Ashley Hochhalter, 4th grade teacher. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Dan. We have a motion and a second to approve 1 through 4. Any discussion? Any discussion? Dan?
With these resignations, we're now over that 10% attrition, and that's concerning. So I guess this may or not be the right place to do it, but I do want to have that discussion about, is there school culture, is it community culture, what's driving this, and if you have any information on that.
Sure, and I can bring a little bit more information to the board in the future, but I actually did a little 5-year analysis on resignations, and I don't have them all in front of me now, but actually the outlier year, interestingly, is our COVID year, when we left we didn't come back for the 4th quarter. That was the year we had the least amount of attrition. We had 5. I found that to be interesting. I would have assumed that was a little bit higher than the norm, but it is significantly lower. The other years, the year before that and the 2 years right after that, were both 14 or 15. So fairly consistent in those years. This year, a little bit higher. Right now, it's 21, I believe. So it's higher than that average, but still within there. But if you look in I believe that it was 10 of those 21 were moving, or were related to moving. And I can only tell you the same amount of information that you already know from looking at resignations, but a lot of the, and of course we have an exit interview process that helps us to glean more information, but a lot of what we see are people moving different opportunity in a larger school district, moving out of state for various reasons. That's about half of what we've seen are people moving for those types of reasons. I don't know, as I looked in, and I could categorize those things and say where I believe that they're, leaving for, although what people put on paper may not be the same. But as I looked through that 5 years of data, I don't know if I saw outside of the number, like an alarming trend of, ooh, this is happening, so this is the result. I think a lot of it has to do simply with the common attrition of, people moving on to different career paths or people moving to different communities. I wouldn't see a significant number in those 5 years that I would say would be attributed to work expectations, culture, environment, anything like that. But again, I couldn't speak to that other than what I see on the same resignation letter that you do, or what I can glean through the exit interviews.
Jason?
Well, I think anytime we focus on the after the fact, either through the exit interview, even the resignation letter, we're still doing somewhat of an injustice to our current staff who may be experiencing things. So I still think that a discussion on assessing, analyzing the culture of the district, top to bottom, inside and out, is something we need to do, because I'm not saying there's a lot of awesome things going on in our district, and just because we want to look at those and others does not mean we just want to make everybody better. And that's what I've been, preaching, and hopefully we can have some discussion at some time about that. And now would be a good time to do it because it's summer.
Thank you, Jason. Any other, Jamie?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that, I don't know that we get a lot of information from those exit interviews or the letters of resignations. I wonder if there's a possibility that we could maybe come up with some sort of anonymous survey that goes out throughout the year once or twice, so the board could get some feedback as to, are our district staff happy? Are there problems that maybe they're not comfortable sharing with us or sharing with people? I don't know. Something like I said, we want to be proactive, because once that exit interview, they're gone. They've already resigned, and there's nothing more we can do or improve on for that particular staff. But we want to maintain the staff that we currently do have, and I think anything that we can do, to get some insight from them in the meantime would be a good option.
Thank you, Jamie. Dan?
My only comment was going to be, when we talk about school culture, there's a lot of it that we can maybe help, but we don't control the culture around us. And so there's going to be limitations on what we can do to address issues on that front. But it was just that comment.
Thank you, Dan. Aaron?
Yeah, I think we want to be a little bit careful here, and that we don't start bridging into the administration of staff as a board. That's not our job. Our job is to, provide the oversight, but we don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of surveys and stuff like that with the staff. This is where, I think our role in this should be more from a strategic perspective, and that we set goals for the district, and then we measure our performance against those goals. And then it's up to Dr.-elect to administer that and achieve those goals. That should be our role, not in administrating relationships between staff members. So I think we need to recognize our boundaries here when we get into this stuff. So, but that does bring in a point, and I'll bring it up again later under a different agenda item, is our lack of a strategic plan. I think we as a board need to be more active in that and not just simply leaning on somebody else to do it for us. I think we have powers that we can leverage and to help facilitate the progression of that plan. And I think we need to engage in that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Aaron. Thank you for that.
One last thing, absolutely right on the strategic plan. I'm going to push back a little bit on our job is to direct student outcomes. And I'm not saying that we're going to get in the way of staff relationships. I'm talking about if there are things happening within our district that we can do better. If there's not, great. But if there is something that we can do better as a district, not a school, not a whatever, then that's something that we should look at.
Any other comments before we move forward? Oh, Gail, go ahead.
I like to think of this more as opportunities for improvement. Sometimes when I worked with seniors at the end of the year, we do a survey. Where were things that I might have missed? Where did I hit the mark? And not as a critique of myself, but sometimes in the busyness of doing a job, stuff gets missed. So I don't want us to look as we're wrong. Where are opportunities for us to improve? Where are things we may be missing because we're so passionate about education and working so hard? And those things just happen because it's the nature of the beast. So I always like opportunities for improvement.
I called the, oh, sorry. I was going to call the question on the motion. I got us off base.
I'm going to let Dr.
Just one comment.
Dr. Leck.
I think one of the responsibilities I have in the district, I serve on the Central Valley Health Board. They do, and I was actually thinking about this recently, but I think they do a nice 10,000-foot view survey in a number of different areas that give us as a board kind of an idea. It's not the specifics, but it gives us an idea of contentedness in a number of different categories. And maybe that's the middle ground that we're talking about, not the minutia of how those things work, but maybe we could get a better sense of, what is the level of contentedness? Are we in this certain area extremely happy, or are we just sort of happy? And that could give us some direction on, are there things we need to do better? Are there things we can do better? Not necessarily the ins and outs and the real particulars of it, but at least give you a sense of the pulse. And maybe that's more along the lines of what could happen. So just a thought. I was thinking about getting a little bit more information from Riley on that, and I think I might do that.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second for approval of resignations at the conclusion of the 2022 to 2023 contract year. Number 1, Jacoby Lloyd, JMS Reading. Number 2, Hannah Lloyd, Family and Consumer Science. Number 3, Heather Ronnie, Elementary Music Teacher and Director of Choir, 6th grade music teacher. Number 4, Ashley Hochhalter, 4th grade teacher. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? There being, yep, we'll do that. Yep, we'll wait till we get to them all. And there being no further discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. And D, approval of resignation at the conclusion of 2022 to 2023 contract year. Number 5, Leah Nelson, English learner teacher. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan, second by Melissa. We have a motion, a second, to approve the resignation at the conclusion of the 2022 to 2023 contract year for number 5, Leah Nelson, English learner teacher. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Yes. Welcome to the district for our newcomers and for those that are leaving our district. We appreciate all your service and dedication that you have given to our district. It's very much appreciated. So, number 6, policy and procedures. Number 7, tuition. A, approval of a tuition agreement for a pre-K student to attend Pingree Buchanan School District for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Melissa. We have a motion and a second for approval of tuition agreement for a pre-K student to attend Pingree Buchanan School District for the 2023 to 2024 school year. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. 8, under other, A, approval of the 2023 to 2024 handbooks. Number 1, Jamestown Middle School Handbook. Number 2, JPS Elementary Handbook. Is there a motion? Motion by Jamie. Is there a second? Second by Gail. We have a motion and a second for approval of the 2023 to 2024 handbooks, Jamestown Middle School Handbook and JPS Elementary Handbook. Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B, presentation and approval of the 2023 to 2024 technology plan. Mike, please come forward and discuss the plan with us.
Okay, I'm sure Dr. Luck has shared with you the technology plan for 23-24 for your approval. This year, most of our discussion was about the cybersecurity standards and how that was going to be taught in the district. We're still working out the fine details on that. We've got some ideas. Obviously, we're waiting for Mr. Hagelin's replacement to come in and help us with that decision as well. Looking forward to an exciting year. We've got a lot of stuff. I've been working with Christy. We're going to be doing a lot of E-rate stuff this year, so we're going to be doing a new Wi-Fi upgrade controller, some new switches. Dr. Luck has put a line item into the budget now for security, so we're looking forward to increasing our, basically a part of, excuse me, the bulk of that is going to be into camera rotation, because we've got some cameras that are getting pretty long in the tooth at the high school. And also we're looking for, we've got people coming in on May 30th to start looking at some access controls. Quentin and I had a Zoom meeting today with FERCA. We've got a Vigilon coming in, Marco is their representative coming in to help do the control access there. We've got some details to work out. Do we want to do keys? Do we want to do fobs? Do we want to do locks? Do we want the buzzer? Are we going to use panic buttons? All the questions we asked back in 2005 when we remodeled. It'll be time to answer those questions again. I know we plan on talk with Mr. Gaylor and his office staff and some construction we want to do up there to secure the festival up there at the high school as we lock that, at the CTC and the transition house as well. I have visited with the ladies at the tea house. They're excited by the proposal to have that locked down. So again, we've had a little turnover. You know, Jada became a principal now, so we have to find a new parent representative. I believe Teresa Olson found us someone from up at, she knows at the childhood care at CTC to help us out there. That's pretty much what's going on. What can I answer for you?
And then, Mike, I think there's 2 board members also that are assigned to the committee that might not be listed, so we'll want to update those.
Yep.
Talk a little bit how the plan comes together throughout the year.
Okay. We basically, you know, once upon a time, this was required by the state that we do this. Now we do it for our own benefit. It's not required by the state anymore. Gives us an idea of where we're at, what we're doing, allows us, well, there's approximately 31 members, give or take, on that committee. So we have a lot of input from all of the stakeholders across the community, teachers, administrators, parents, community leaders, business leaders. Fortunately, you know, we did a good job in the past, so we've got a pretty good foundation now. We pretty much just consider it a living document and bring it current. Looking at some of the stuff, things that have changed, like we now do one-to-one devices where we used to have CALs. So we've had, you know, bring the plan up to date where we're not doing CALs so much anymore, just a few here or there. But by and large, with all the kids being one-to-one K to 12 now, it's a lot easier that way. Not so much in the backside, but it's all good. So, yeah, we just continue and ask for continuous input. And we meet 4 times a year. And Nathan and I usually sit down and discuss what we think we need to highlight, but we're always asking stakeholders, what do you think we need to talk about? What do you have concerns about? What do you want to know more about? What can we do different? So.
Any questions? Aaron.
So just to confirm my understanding of this, so this plan here has been, you know, the structure of it's been in place, and this is basically going through a periodic or annual update. Is that generally accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so we're just doing incremental things in these updates on moving forward, with the big one in this year being cybersecurity.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so when I was looking over this and going through it, I kind of got that impression, which, you know, made me raise a point that, are we in the same position as far as, from a district perspective, in terms of the strategy that we want to try to implement. And does this align to that strategy? And the answer to that question that I came to is, I don't know. Are we spending the money on the right areas to achieve the goals that we want to try to achieve? I don't know. And so when I'm looking at this plan and saying, we can spend $1 million on something, and I'm not sure if it's the right something.
Right.
So I understand, and appreciate the work of the committee and looking at and bringing that input. And I understand the legacy of what this plan brings, which is why, I'll support it. But I think we need to get to a point where we align these types of operational plans to the strategic vision of the district. Again, I'm a little bit frustrated that we haven't gotten there yet. When we had our board retreat back in January, we said we were going to be there by July. It's getting close, and we haven't started yet. So I'm going to just take this opportunity to raise that frustration, and I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
And Aaron, I do agree with you on that, and that has been brought up even at the, this has a little bit of legacy to it as well. I think even sometimes when building administrators would meet first and then the committee would meet after, some of that even blended together, and it was more just general admin stuff versus strategic plan, or moving forward for a technology plan. So my hope is the same, that we can, the dollars will align where they're being spent. They will align with the strategic plan. And we still are on track for July, but yes, we have some work to be done.
And just to bring up some specific examples too, working through, look at the consent agenda and the bills paid, and just stacking up all of the different items that we spend money on for multiple software packages, and how those all tie together, and what are we buying all that stuff for? I don't know. It would be good to have an understanding of, what is that vision? What is that strategic goal that we're trying to achieve with, with the dollars that are associated with this? And then, is there a tie into, we're looking at virtual learning at a much higher level. How is that in here? I don't know. So just, those are the kind of things that I think come up from a practical standpoint, that having that linkage into that strategic plan would help in the review and understanding where we're going with this.
And I think the technology plan helps that, because it is a living document, and we are free to change and move as we decide the way we were going to go, yeah.
Right, but it's more of an operational and tactical approach.
Right. Would like us to have one consolidated ed. Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. So, Mike, anything else to add on the strategic
Nope, looking forward to the
plan?
next year. We got a lot of challenges coming up, so it'll be exciting.
Yes, very good. So we have presentation approval of the 2023 to 2024 technology plan. Is there a motion? Motion by Jason. Second by Dan. We have a motion, a second, for presentation approval of the 2023 to 2024 technology plan. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Items for future agenda. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for coming tonight and staying tonight. Items for future agenda. Any items for future agenda? If there's any items, let Dr. Luck or myself know. Meetings to be scheduled. A, teacher negotiations meeting on Tuesday, May 16th, 2023 in the Thompson Community Room in the middle school. GED graduation Tuesday, May 16th, 2023 at 7 p.m. in the Career and Technology Center. Transition House graduation on Thursday, May 18th, 2023 at 11 a.m. in the Transition House. High school graduation on Sunday, May 28th, 2023 at 2:30 p.m. in the Jamestown Civic Center. School board meeting on Monday, June 5th. Oh my goodness, hard to believe it'll be June. At 5:15 in the Thompson Community Room in the middle school. We may also, yes. Aaron.
What time is the teacher negotiation meeting tomorrow? 5 p.m. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. We may also, being as we are in negotiations, we may also need a special meeting, and if that's the case, we'll have Amy contact you. Possible executive session to discuss negotiation strategies. Is there a motion? Is there a motion? If not, monthly superintendent evaluation, Section 2, board relations, and Section 3, human resource management. There being no further business before the board, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for staying.